My name is Carla Romeo. I work for IDH as the strategy lead for Livingwage. And I'm here with several of my colleagues, and we will have Ronald Sanabria and Honor Johnson helping us go through this webinar. And I will just do a brief introduction. The objective of this meeting is to provide a brief update on all the improvements we have done to the salary matrix. It was published more than a year ago, and we have done several consultations, as we will explain you. And based on this and other testing, we have just this week published the new version of the salary matrix, which you can find online. This webinar now is to briefly summarize what is the salary matrix and the changes we have done to it. And we will frame this discussion under the whole roadmap of living wages. As the salary matrix is one step to close the gap, we will briefly also introduce you to the roadmap. And when we need to go into more technical discussions on exactly how the salary matrix work, we will be publishing in the next 2 weeks videos and recordings really explaining step by step how it works. So this webinar will not deep dive into the details. It will stay explaining high level what it means, the salary matrix, what do we consider that needs to be input into it. I will briefly introduce also our organization, IDH. We are a Dutch-based organization having offices in more than 15 countries all over the world. We are funded by different governments, not only the Dutch, but also the Norwegian government, the Danish government, the Swiss government, and also other funders. The work we do is on living wage and other topics. We also work on living income. We also work on mitigation of deforestation, gender issues, and responsible agrochemical use. The purpose of the webinar today, it is on living wage, of course, but you can find more information on the rest in our website. We mainly work with agriculture and also some manufacturing, such as apparel sector. And within the agriculture, we especially work with cocoa, with coffee, with tea, with bananas, other fresh products, and you can see more of our commodities in the website. The work we do on living wage at the moment has focused a lot on bananas, on tea, on flowers, and on other fresh products. And based on all these learnings, here is this webinar explaining the roadmap. Before giving the floor to Ronald, good to mention a bit of the technical circumstances of this webinar. You are all welcome to bring your questions into the Q&A box that you can find below, and I will be managing these questions. At the end, we will leave at least 15 minutes for these questions and answers by our speakers. So please keep adding your questions if you need more clarification, if you want to go in depth with anything. And if there is no time to answer all the questions, we will also add our emails at the end of these slides. So you are also welcome to contact us as a follow-up. And I think that's it from my side. Welcome. Thanks so much. And Ronald, I give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Carla, for the introduction. And welcome, everybody. I'm very excited about sharing with you the news about the improvements, the changes that we've made to the salary matrix, which I believe, just looking at some of the participants, many of you have already used and are familiarized with it. But before we get into the exciting changes and improvements made to the tool, we felt it was important to brief you on how this tool fits within everything that we do at IDH in terms of living wages, which is basically what we call our roadmap on living wages that has these 5 steps that you can see on the screen. The steps of our roadmap are inspired really on the needs that we have felt close and personal from companies working with us that are trying to move forward in their own strategies, their own plans, addressing living wages and moving forward in terms of addressing gaps. And the roots, the foundations of our roadmap are basically based on those needs. You would say that the first step or the starting point for any company would be to have a better understanding on how living wages are calculated in a given region, right? That's the benchmark, the parameter that you need in order to understand and define ways on how to move forward. But then once you know that, you want to know how your own company or the companies in your supply chain are performing against those values, the recommended living wages. And that's where precisely this tool, the salary matrix, comes into play. In other words, it's a tool that enables not just to understand better what's the total remuneration that my workers are receiving, or the workers in my supply chain, but also enables a comparison with the recommended living wages in the first step. Coupled with that, and as for those of you that have already used the salary matrix, you know that it's a tool that could be used by anybody as a self-assessment. But many companies also want to know, how can I verify that the data that I'm using in my salary matrix is accurate, is being collected appropriately, and that the calculations have been done in the right way. So that is where it comes the third step of our roadmap in verifying the information that goes into the calculations of remuneration and gaps. With those three steps, companies can then move forward designing solutions to address potential gaps that they might found in their own companies and in their supply chain by involving all the different stakeholders in project design and project implementation. So today we will give you an overview of those four steps, but ultimately what we want is to be able to share the learnings. Everything that through those projects we're able to capture, those learnings need to be shared. We're all learning in this field and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So today I will give you an overview starting with step one, what is the living wage? And then my colleague Honor Johnson will dive into what I know you want to hear, which is the improvements, the changes made to the salary matrix. And then I'll pick it up again to briefly talk to all of you about the remaining three steps. Before I do so, just wanted to mention also how we're organized. The roadmap, our roadmap on living wages, is steered by a group of companies whose logos you can see on the screen, and I invite you all to go to our website to look at who's involved. And I also wanted to mention that this is an open group, so anybody interested in participating, please send us an email, which you will see at the end of our presentation. With the support from these companies, we have moved forward developing this roadmap, and their participation improving tools such as the salary matrix, testing it, and so on has been absolutely crucial. But we also have the blessing of an advisory group of the different sustainability certification schemes that are already embracing the topic of living wages and have worked on social compliance for a long time, are providing us with specific advice on specific pieces of the roadmap, including the improvements that we've made to the salary matrix. And we also have a stakeholders committee that have organizations that are working on living wages one way or another in the different sectors that we're involved with. Again, these groups are also open groups for anybody interested in participating. We welcome your participation, so feel free to send us an email. But now let's go deeper into the roadmap, just touching based on step one. The starting point for companies is understanding how a living wage is calculated in a given region that they're interested in. They might be producing in that region or sourcing from that region. There are locally many different methodologies out there that enable us to have those calculations. At IDH, we recommend the use of benchmarks or calculations on living wages that are developed by the Global Living Wage Coalition using the anchor methodology. But we also recognize that there are other useful methodologies out there. So we have set up a process for recognizing other methodologies that can help us advance the dialogue. And I'm very pleased to share with all of you that last week we finalized that process. It's now also available online. on the website of the roadmap, and you can see the criteria that we use for recognizing different methodologies. But let me just give you a sneak preview to it and what the criteria entails. Well, first and foremost, we want to understand how is the cost of living being calculated by the different methodologies for a typical family in a given region. What is the source of information that they're using for calculating the cost of living? We also want to know what is the number of workers that bring income to the family. Are we talking about a full-time person? Are we talking about a full-time person and a part-time person, or two full-time people, and so on? The third criteria has to do with a sense of place, right? Are we talking about a benchmark for living wages that is applicable in an urban setting or a rural setting? Also, we want transparency. We want to know how these different methodologies go about doing their calculations. And finally, we also want to make sure that the information gets updated on a regular basis based on inflation and other factors. With that information, companies then have a value, a benchmark that they can work with in terms of creating potential solutions for addressing gaps. But then the question comes in terms of how do I measure how far or close is my company in regards to those benchmarks? And that's where this tool, the Salary Matrix, comes into place. It's a tool that was developed and designed to help companies, and we were very pleased to make it now available to all of you for calculating current remuneration, but also incorporating information about in-kind benefits, bonuses, and so on that play an important role in terms of the total remuneration that a worker takes home at the end of the month, and also enable that comparison between the current remuneration and the recommended living wage. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to my colleague, Honor Johnson, that will explain to us how we have improved this tool, the Salary Matrix, which you can also check online on our website. Honor, over to you.
Thank you, Ronald. Glad to see everyone's joining us today. I think in the chat was also shared the link. If you're curious, you can check out where to download that and more information from the chat. But like Ronald said, yes, I'm here to give a bit of background on the Salary Matrix and how we evolved from the version that many of you know to version 2. And also walk through some of the key changes as well as a brief overview of what the current tool looks like. So many of you are familiar with the original Salary Matrix, which was published last year in January 2019. And following that, we began a public consultation process where we received valuable feedback from many of the companies and partners that we currently work with. Many of you are here today. From that public consultation, we received many comments on how the tool could be improved and be brought to be used in a variety of sectors and a variety of fields and calculate wages, bonuses, and in-kind benefits in additional and more flexible ways. So following the public consultation process, we began adopting that feedback and doing field testing, which laid the foundation to make those changes. And that would not have been possible without many of the companies and partners that we work with. Many of you are here today. So from the feedback and field testing, we were able to test in 11 countries and 5 sectors, many of which Carla mentioned before, in coffee, pineapples, bananas, flowers, tea, and all of those you can see here, as well as a number of countries. So following that field testing and the changes that were suggested through the consultation process, the suggested changes were reviewed by the members that you saw before on the roadmap of living wages, which resulted in the current version that we have, the Salary Matrix version 2, which has currently been published. In the future, we plan to prepare a digital version, which will further allow the usefulness of this tool. But what is so great about the version 2, and how can measuring current remuneration through this tool be comparable with the living wage benchmarks that Ronald introduced us to in step 1? So the basic aims of the Salary Matrix, of course, are to help calculate the current remuneration, which includes wages, bonuses, and in-kind benefits, and then compare that remuneration against valuable and accurate living wage benchmarks. And through the tool, we can unveil those barriers to closing the living wage gap and find solutions between suppliers and retailers. The tool is also extremely useful to track and trace progress over time from year to year and support the work with certification programs, many of whom are introducing living wages into their ambitions and their requirements. And overall, of course, we're also here to raise awareness in all sectors about paying, of course, a living wage. The link was shared before, but again, you can see it briefly there on the screen. And the tool can be downloaded and is freely available. So just to say again that these learnings and improvements were, of course, supported greatly from the Technical Advisory Committee, and we really thank all of them for their detailed review, which helped us make a handful of changes, many of which are listed here. So the specific requirements for which in-kind benefits can be included in remuneration. How can we categorize the data to be either by job categories or by individuals? How do we deal with payment structures that are incentive-based or bonuses that often make up a significant part of wages and remuneration? And also, how do we adopt this tool for a standard work week, which we know in many countries can differ? So from there, I'm going to walk through more of the specific changes that were made to the tool. So to elaborate the guidelines more specifically for the in-kind benefits that must be included, those we have put forward along with the Technical Advisory Committee, these requirements here. So in-kind benefits must, of course, directly reduce the cost of living for a worker. They must be accepted by workers as being valuable, be regularly provided, expected in advance, aligned with working hours, and not mandatory by law. And the ones you see on the bottom of the screen are concrete examples of those. And when we walk through the tool, you'll be able to see how those are added into the remuneration. So in addition for which in-kind benefits can be included, we want to know how the value can be added, right? We're talking about a technical monetary value of an in-kind benefit. And through this version of the tool, it helps to add that value by determining the cost to the employer for providing that in-kind benefit. And the tool, which is also a unique aspect of this tool and helps compare with a living wage, is that it takes the total value of all the remuneration and limits the amount of in-kind benefits that can be paid. Of course, this is in alignment with the anchor methodology and general requirements for how remuneration can be paid in a way that matches living wage. So that's capped at 30% of total remuneration. And the tool does allow, of course, all data to be entered without modifying the data in any way. And it just sort of alerts the user and becomes a tool for communicating about living wage. And beyond the 30%, the individual benefits are capped in a similar way by limiting them to 10% of total remuneration, except for housing, which is a bit more at 15%. Another significant change that was made from the original salary matrix to version 2 here is allowing the ability to list all individual employees in the salary matrix. So in our field testing, we became aware that many payroll systems were able to export the data for the wages, remuneration, and in-kind benefits at an individual level, whereas the original tool was grouping individuals into job categories. So now both options are available in the tool, which makes that data entry and that communication much easier. Also built into the original version of the tool was the adaptation towards a standard work week. And originally the 48-hour work week, aligning with the ILO definition, was used, but now we've adopted it so that the national standard working hours are included when they're lower than 48 hours, which is most cases, of course. Another category of changes was how to take into account incentive pay and bonuses in a way that accurately reflect living wage payment. And now we've added on these additional requirements for bonuses that employees can, of course, expect in advance. For job categories where incentive pay can be expected in advance, of course, that incentive pay can be used to add into the wage category as well. Other minor changes include this automatic adjustment to the minimum wage, which was originally a part of the tool, and that automatic adjustment has been removed. Gender-specific results are also available through this tool. So all the data entered, as I mentioned before, either whether it's for a job category or an individual worker, can now be divided per gender, which allows us to see very interesting gender-based results throughout the tool. And we've also adopted the tool so that it generally speaks to more than just a single sector. And by doing that, we've increased the number of seasons which could be available. So this allows commodities or manufacturing who maybe work on more than 2 seasons to be able to use the tool as well. So following those adjustments, we've published the Excel version of the tool, and this is sort of what the first page looks like. And as you walk through the tool, you'll kind of move through the tabs on the right, and a full detailed video on how exactly to fill this out and complete this as a producer, as a facility owner, will be available on the website through a video. But now I'll just sort of walk you through the information that you sort of need before filling this out. So in the gray box to the right, you'll see a list of information that you should have on hand before completing the salary matrix, which of course is nice to better understand what type of information is going into the salary matrix. So you'll see the facility information, which is very specific to the location, the production, and the season timing. That can be entered in the facility information tab. The next bullet, which lists the job categories, the list of work areas, all the list of job categories, and the number of men and women in each job category, of course, is setting up the framework for the data entry. And that can be included in the tabs called job categories and number of workers. So by making sure we have all this information on hand, we can reduce the time spent using this tool. The third bullet, of course, is talking about wages and bonuses. So what are the seasonal units and rates for which each job category is paid, and how much bonuses are earned on average per job category or individual? And of course, everything is entered in gross values. Finally, the value of in-kind benefits. So this is the amount spent by the company to provide in-kind benefits, as well as the number of workers and which workers are receiving those. So once we have that information on hand, we can sort of go and get started. And this tool is also increased in user friendliness, if you will. So to help this tool stand on its own so that it can be completed without too much further instruction, we've added these sort of blue boxes here, which you'll see on the top right, which indicate comments that provide more detail about how to complete the tool. So once those comments are read carefully, those will probably answer a lot of questions. And further on, you'll notice that the formatting generally follows this yellow and green format, where the yellow cells indicate cells that data should be entered, and the green cells will indicate your results. The next tab that you see on this page, of course, is the facility information, which is about the location of the facility that we're measuring wages in, where it's located, and the length of the season. The next 2 tabs about job categories and number of workers help set up that framework to measure, are we measuring all the workers in the facility, which of course is the goal. And then finally, in the last 3 tabs, we're adding wages, bonuses, and the value of in-kind benefits. So once all of that information has been included, we can finally show the results tab, which is a great addition to this tool, especially from the version 1, which did not provide too many in-depth results. But on this version, you'll be able to see of all the job categories, which workers have a gap, which workers do not have a gap, gaps per gender, and the average amount of wages paid in-kind benefits. So this is an excellent, of course, addition to the tool, but what this tool does not allow you to do, which is why we're still here helping, is to provide a visualization of the results, which again, as I mentioned before, one of the key goals, the key aims of the salary matrix is to help that communication throughout the supply chain. And this figure, which we've developed, helps communicate about the living wage, about the current wages, and about the gaps that need to be filled throughout the supply chain. What this graph does is show on the x-axis all of the job categories in a facility. So here you'll see one example is example 1, men. And there's a similar category, example 1 for women. But to just take this example 1 for men, we can see that it's color-coded for red because that worker earns below the living wage. That worker or job category earns below the living wage. And we can also see that the width of that column indicates the number of people in that job category. Of course, when this is filled out by individual, you will only have one person included. But when we fill this out by job category, it quickly allows us to identify which job categories have significant problems or are significantly below the living wage. Where we can see on the left, of course, is the amount earned per month. And in this case, it is in euros, but of course, it will be adopted to the local currency. Also on this tool, we have a horizontal line indicating the living wage, which for this example is just 650 euros. And you see a range of gaps here. The lowest paid job category has an 18% gap, whereas the highest paid job category that is below the living wage only has a 2% gap. So throughout this visualization, as well as the summary table listed above, this can really help communicate and get work started, of course, on closing the living wage gap, which of course is the reason for providing tools such as this one. So with that, I think I'll pass it back to Ronald. And again, I hope you're all able to download the tool and email us if you have more questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Honor, for the introduction. And as I said before, the tool is available now for anybody that wants to use it as a self-assessment. But we know that there are companies that want to get the information verified, and that's where the step 3 of the roadmap comes into place. So the question is, how do we move from a self-assessment to an assessment that is checked and verified on the ground? So we're making this tool available for any organization that does those kinds of checks on the ground. Certification schemes, sustainability schemes, such as the ones involved in our technical advisory group, and others that can enable companies to check the information that goes into the self-assessment to make sure that the information has been accurately entered into the tool, as well as the calculations of the potential gaps have been done in the right way. All of those 3 steps really become the foundation that enable companies to then move forward in terms of designing potential solutions to close gaps. So we recognize the importance to do training to secure alignment. Also very glad to announce that during the rest of this year, we will be putting together, as Honor mentioned, a series of videos that explain how to use the tool with concrete examples on how to apply it in different sectors. We will have those videos available in English and in Spanish with the objective of securing that level of alignment. And we will make that training available for anybody that is interested in taking that on. We will be sending to all of you in this webinar a link once the videos have been uploaded. With that information, companies can then move, as I said, to step 4 of the roadmap, which is the development and implementation of projects. And for the past 5-6 years, IDH has been implementing a series of projects that have yielded important learnings in the field of living wages. One example of a project that we're executing right now is with the Dutch retailers that are committed, as announced last year, to sourcing 100% of their entire banana assortment that is sold in the Dutch market from companies that can report progress on living wages. Specifically, their commitment is that during this year, we will be mapping potential gaps precisely using this tool that Honor just introduced to us, with the objective of reducing gaps over the next 5 years by at least 10% every year, and ultimately reaching 2025 with a gap reduction of at least 75. So here you have a concrete example on how this tool is enabling that connection between a market commitment, in this case from the Dutch retailers, and the entire supply chain, in this case producing bananas for the Dutch market. Very exciting project, so stay tuned for news on that one too. So all of that, ultimately, we want to make sure that through these projects, such as the one that I just mentioned and others, yield important lessons that we can share with everybody. So communication is a big part of our roadmap, and we will continue to share information through our website. We will continue to publish and write about it in our newsletter, which I will encourage all of you to sign up for, because that will be the vehicle that we will continue to use to inform progress and new events around this topic, and also participating in conferences and talks where we can share what we've been learning with all of you. So in summary, not just with the tool, but more broadly speaking, with the entire roadmap, we want to encourage you all to use these tools in your own endeavors and envision next steps in terms of potential actions that you can do with the players in your supply chain, involving everybody to reduce potential living wage gaps. We really hope that this tool will serve you in your own efforts. At IDH, we can support you in that journey anytime by creating coalitions on the market end, for instance, such as the example that I gave with the Dutch retailers, to create demand for products that come from sources that are paying living wages, but also create coalitions on the production side, conveying different stakeholders over a plan that will enable to reduce gaps. We're willing and ready to financially co-invest with you in any pioneer, innovative approach to potentially reduce living wage gaps in a given region, in a given supply chain. And that could be done individually, company by company, but also collectively. Finally, I'm going to pass it back to my colleague Carla to also share a little bit of information on what we're doing on living income, which is an important area of work for IDH as well. And then we will open it up for Q&A. Carla.
Thanks so much, Ronald and Honor, for a great presentation. Maybe it's good before we go into the questions and answers. There is already quite a few. I also invite anyone else to add more questions. Before that, it might be good indeed to also share a bit on our work on living income, which, as several of you know, it can be quite linked to living wage. So on the living income topic, we understand living income as more relevant for commodities that are mainly produced by smallholder farmers. So on that sense, our focus is really on other commodities such as cocoa, coffee, and tea. Not only with this, but that's really where we are working quite a lot on this topic. And we are also in the process to develop an income guidance tool to help companies assess incomes of smallholder farmers in their supply chain. So the thinking can be quite similar to the salary matrix that we just presented, in the sense that we know that several companies are interested in better mapping their supply chain to know what are the incomes being paid in their supply chain and how this relates to living income or to any other benchmark that companies might be interested to drive towards. So that's one thing that we hope we will be able to also organize a webinar in the next month. Another work that relates to this is also a modeling tool that we are developing in order to define which are the best interventions to use when we want to increase farmer incomes. We know that different interventions may affect incomes in different ways, and also we know that it differs depending on the crop you are looking at and depending on the country or region you are looking at. So we are also gathering this intelligence to help our partners better choose which are the high impact models to increase farmer incomes. And of course, we are also testing these high impact models as we speak with several of our partners to find the best interventions to increase incomes. So that's a brief on the income space, which relates more to smallholder farmers, as I was saying. If we go back to workers and to the living wage topic, I see several questions, so I will start, Ronald, with one question for you from Johannes and Miguel, quite related both. It is about where to look for these numbers. If a company wants to work on living wage, is there anywhere where we can find what is a living wage for a specific region and for a specific crop? And also, how are we enabling for these numbers to be updated yearly. So
Thank you.
Ronald, I pass this to you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you both very much for the question. Yeah, good question. And actually, as I said, the starting point of get going. We will definitely recommend, as I mentioned during the presentation, to visit the website of the Global Living Wage Coalition, which has published benchmarks on the different benchmark studies that they have done. And they do cover now a whole array of different countries and regions specifically. That specific methodology doesn't necessarily cover the entire world. So there are different other methodologies that could help cover those gaps in terms of having the concrete values. On our website, if you go to the section of the website that talks about the roadmap on living wages and go to step 1 of the roadmap, you will see what's the process that we recommend using in terms of the different criteria for selecting those numbers. For the rest of this year, we will be welcoming the participation of other methodologies that are also generating these numbers to apply for that level of recognition that I mentioned before. Our objective is to be able to have links to the websites of methodologies that are duly recognized by IDH, by our organization. We will also have there very transparently how these different methodologies comply with the basic criteria that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So that will be a very useful source of information. Honor, I don't know if you would like to also mention other sites that could be, apart from ours, that could also be accessed to collect information about other methodologies.
Yeah, in addition to the Global Living Wage Coalition and those recognized by the IDH recognition process, there are a handful. Some are more specific to different sectors, but of course, we always recommend the use of one recognized through our methodology. Another place that kind of joins all the existing information is Align, which has most of the Global Living Wage Coalition benchmark listed as well. But I think currently that Global Living Wage Coalition website is the best resource for finding those benchmarks. I'm happy to add a little bit on the expected process about digitalizing the tool, and I'm sure Ronald has something to add to this. But as many of you who are with the Dutch Living Wage Banana Commitment know, we have begun the process of creating a digital tool, which should be available in the future. And the goal of this tool has, in addition to all of the goals of the salary matrix, will be used to better speak with other systems like certification and standards, like Ronald mentioned. How can we verify that data through that method? How can we share that with the Dutch retailers who are looking to collect that data without overburdening producers, having to fill this out maybe multiple times for multiple purposes? So again, aiming to reduce the number of times that producers have to fill this out, that a certain facility has to fill this out, talking about sectors beyond agro-commodities, and trying to get those systems to speak with things like certifications. At this point, I don't think there's any concrete plans to make them speak with payroll systems because of the way payroll systems vary so significantly between sectors. But maybe, Ronald, you want to add to that? And of course, that's definitely something we can look into.
Yeah, no, just to reiterate what you just said, at this point in time, there are no specific plans to do so, but it doesn't mean that we cannot do it, once we have the digital version. But another important point there is that apart from having it in a digital format that could potentially be more user-friendly than Excel, although the existing tool is terrific, I would really encourage you to go and see it and use it. It could also enable the possibility of using it offline. So in a way, not this year, but starting next year, we're also envisioning the possibility of having the tool not just available on our website, but in the similar format that the Excel template is now, that you can actually go in, download it, work on it, not necessarily work on it online. So that will be a good feature for you to also keep in mind, that will be enabled in the upcoming months.
There is another question from Han Tran. Asking why did we test it so far in these 11 countries, and how do we see this moving forward?
Sure. Well, we did testing the testing was actually open. You know, the invitation made last year was for anybody wanting to use it. So we basically put it out there for anybody that wanted to give it a try to do so. So some of the testing was simply coincidental, that people interested in a given origin in a given place went ahead and worked on it. But it also relates to a little bit of the initial sector where this tool was originally created. So many of the countries that you saw listed on the slides are banana producing countries, simply because the tool was originally developed thanks to the partnership between Rainforest Alliance and IDH in 2 banana producing countries. So the starting point for testing that was going beyond those 2 countries and see if the tool could work in other banana producing countries apart from the 2 original ones envisioned. From there, we then move on to other sectors that IDH works with. So as a natural next step for us to test the tool, for instance, in tea, in flowers, in coffee, in other sectors that we're directly related to. But we know that there have been over 500 users that have tested the matrix in other parts of the world, but we don't necessarily know have the information to be able to list them. So we decided to only list the countries where we are sure the testing has taken place. Another reason was also this tool, as Honor also briefly mentioned, speaks to certification schemes and sustainability schemes that in the agriculture world are being used. For us, it was important to partner to work with different certification schemes to test the tool in the countries where they're already working. And that basically led to additional testing between September last year and January this year in sectors like flowers, for instance, with great support from Fair Trade, in bananas and pineapples with support from Rainforest Alliance. We, as I said, we want to continue learning and improving. And if there anybody from any country that was not listed there interested in doing a pilot with us, the doors are open for that to happen. We will be very excited to do that.
Okay, Ronald, if I may go back to you, there is a question if we could share a bit more on the trust and verify step, and maybe link to that. I can also link the question from Helene, where she says, how are we envisioning the sharing of the data?
So on the first one, on the verification side, the trust and verified step, basically it boils down to the fact that many companies working on living wages want to make sure that the information is somehow checked, right? Because they don't have the ability to basically go to the ground and verify that all the data that goes into a tool like the Salary Matrix is the right data. How do we ensure the credibility, that the numbers are not inflated and so on? So there are different ways that a company can go about doing that type of verification. They could have their own systems to be able to do those checks as part of their ongoing business practices. But there are also many companies that have participated in some of the piloting that are somehow already involving sustainability programs that are embracing or incorporating living wages, already have living wage requirements in their own systems. And ultimately what we want is to, if a producer, if a facility is already certified under any of these schemes, and that specific scheme has requirements on living wages, that the Salary Matrix helps them as a tool, first and foremost, as a self-assessment, as a management tool that enables to have all the information in one place in terms of your remuneration scheme, and then how that compares to a recommended benchmark. But it could also serve as a way of communicating what the situation is with other players in your value chain with whom you would like to address challenges. So in those cases where the facility is already certified by a certification scheme, our hope is that this tool can serve that process, right? We don't want certified facilities that need to demonstrate compliance or that they're moving forward in terms of addressing gaps in living wages to have to use multiple different tools, right? So we want to make it available for anybody, any of those programs that would like to use it. Also recognizing that all of these programs have their own tools, and that's terrific. So our challenge will be only to make sure that, as we said before, there is that connectivity, that the tools can communicate to each other, and that they basically comply with the minimum requirements for trusting the information that goes into it. Down the line, what we envision is the signing of agreements with the different schemes that would like to use this tool or their own tools, but ensuring compatibility with this one, but ultimately ensuring that alignment, which is the overall purpose or spirit of the roadmap, aligning on this topic. Regarding the second question, basically the owner of the information is the facility that works on it. In the case of facilities that would like to use the digital tool that we will be creating in the future, if they are associated with projects that IDH is managing or supporting, such as the project with the Dutch retailers, we will protect that information, obviously, and only share it with those parties that the facility that fills up the information is in agreement with. So in the case of the project with the Dutch retailers, because the purpose is to involve everybody in the value chain, from the producer all the way to the retailers, the objective is that the information could be shared in aggregate format, but it's not that the salary data going into a salary matrix will be public information. Not so whatsoever. That is not the case. The good news is that because the tool will be also available in an offline format to be able to be downloaded by any user, people can use it without any connections with IDH or anybody else. So they can use it on their own, the same way the Excel version that we're announcing today can be used. And themselves, the user, will be able to decide with whom they share that data. Maybe one user is already working with a verification or certification scheme, and they might want to share that information as part of their auditing procedure, but it is up to the user to decide with whom they want to share it.
I understand that we are working very closely with the schemes and that they are also welcome to build their own tool, right? And if that's the case, we will make sure that it's well aligned with all the guidance that we have presented. But maybe if you can share a bit more on that, I think that would be useful for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. We created the tool to, as I said, to facilitate access to anybody that wants to use it. It could be producers, it could be buyers, it could be sustainability schemes, it could be workers' organizations that can use this tool as part of the strengthening efforts for social dialogue. It could be unions, anybody that is interested in using it, it's there, right? But yeah, we want to make sure that for projects in which we have a direct involvement, that there are certain minimum requirements that we consider are necessary for ensuring that the information is accurately collected and checked. So we want to, that's the reason why the step 3 of the roadmap exists, right? To enable that level of trust that we all need around the data.
Thanks everyone for attending. I hope everyone's able to download the tool and explore a little bit more on how it has evolved since the version 1. And we're happy to hear questions and comments and more information at the email here. Ronald?
Yes, and just to encourage all of you again to take a close look at it and use it. That's exactly what we want, to make sure that the tool becomes useful for your own efforts, for your own creation of the strategy. If you work or represent companies that are interested in advancing your own strategies on living wages, we're here to help and ready, as I mentioned before, to co-design projects to be able to close potential living wage gaps in the countries where you work in your supply chains. And finally, I also want to encourage all of you that will use the tool to please keep that channel open, that email that you see on the screen. If you acquire new learnings, if you have challenges, if you have questions as you move forward, implementing the tool or using the tool, please do not hesitate to reach out to us, because ultimately we want to make sure that we potentially incorporate all of your learnings in future versions of this tool and continue polishing it over time. And once again, thank you from all of us for spending 1 hour of time with all of us today to learn about our work in this field.
Thanks, Ronald. Maybe just from my side, just one last point. This was a webinar. We try to share a lot. Everything is also in our website, so we share the links. Feel free to look at it to know more details on how do we choose a living wage benchmark, how do we work with the standards. There is a lot there, and we also envisioning doing more of these webinars in the next month. So I hope we can also keep this channel open with you. And that's it from my side. Thanks everyone for attending.